We have candidates from Harvard. You have gaps. Those words hit Elena like a punch to the stomach. She stood frozen in the glass-walled boardroom, clutching her battered portfolio, her palms sweating against the leather. Across the table, the HR director tossed her resume aside like it was trash. She muttered loud enough for the other executives to hear. Waste of time. Next candidate. It was a Tuesday morning, and Elena had exactly 3 days to come up with $2,000, or she and her sick mother would be on the street. She was about to walk out, humiliated and hopeless, when the heavy mahogany doors swung open. The air in the room changed instantly. A man she recognized, the stranger she had left sleeping in a hotel bed just 5 hours ago, walked to the head of the table. He didn't expose her. He didn't fire her. He looked at her with a dangerous smile and whispered a question that terrified her. But what happened next? No one saw it coming. Not even her. Before I reveal his question, if you've ever had to hide your pain just to survive, hit that like button right now. And subscribe if you believe in love that heals. This story is for you. But to understand why that smile terrified her, we have to go back to the ticking clock that started it all. The clock on the wall of the waiting room didn't tick. It hummed, a low, electric buzz that seemed to vibrate right through the thin soles of Elena's shoes. They were cheap shoes, black pumps scuffed at the heel, polished frantically with a permanent marker in the bathroom of the subway station just 20 minutes ago. She tucked her feet beneath the chrome chair, hoping the receptionist wouldn't notice the imperfection. This was Titan Enterprises. The air conditioning here smelled like money, crisp, filtered, and aggressively freezing. Elena smoothed the fabric of her pencil skirt, her palms damp with a cold sweat that she couldn't control. It was a thrift store find, a designer label from 3 seasons ago that had cost her last $20 of disposable income. If she didn't get this job, there would be no disposable income. There would be no income at all. The eviction notice sitting on her kitchen counter wasn't a threat anymore. It was a promise. 3 days. She had exactly 3 days to come up with $2,000, or she and her sick mother would be on the street. The weight of that reality sat on her chest, heavy and suffocating, making it hard to draw a full breath in this glass-walled aquarium of a lobby. Elena Vance? The voice was sharp, cutting through her spiraling panic like a knife. The receptionist didn't look up from her sleek computer screen. Elena stood immediately, her knees shaking slightly, and forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She walked toward the double mahogany doors, clutching her battered portfolio like a shield against the world. Inside, the room was vast and intimidating. A long, polished table stretched out like a runway, populated by 3 people who looked at her with the boredom of executioners who had seen too many victims that day. A woman with severe glasses, a man scrolling dismissively on his phone, and an older gentleman who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. They didn't offer her water. They didn't offer a handshake. They just pointed to the single, isolated chair at the far end of the table. The interrogation began. It was standard, cold, and dismissive. They picked apart her resume, sneering at the gap years she had spent caring for her mother, dismissing her freelance work as unfocused. Elena answered with practiced calm, her voice steady even as her heart hammered against her ribs. She was drowning, and they were watching the bubbles rise with mild disinterest. She needed this salary. She needed health insurance. She needed a miracle. Just as the woman with the glasses opened her mouth to deliver what felt like a rejection, the heavy doors behind Elena swung open. The air in the room changed instantly. It wasn't just a shift in pressure. It was a shift in gravity. The 3 executives straightened up, phones vanished into pockets, and postures were corrected with military precision. Silence fell, absolute and terrified. Elena turned in her chair, the leather creaking loudly in the quiet. First, she saw the shoes. Italian leather, dark as night, stepping with a rhythm of absolute authority. Then the suit, charcoal gray, tailored to perfection, outlining a physique that was powerful and imposing. And then the face. The world stopped. The fluorescent lights of the boardroom seemed to dim, replaced by the hazy, golden glow of a hotel bar memory from less than 24 hours ago. It was him. The stranger. The man she had collided with in a moment of reckless abandon. The man whose laugh had been the first warm thing she had felt in years. The man she had left sleeping in a tangle of white sheets at the Ritz-Carlton only this morning. Her breath hitched, an audible gasp that echoed in the silent room. He wasn't just a stranger. He wasn't a mid-level manager or a visiting client. He walked to the head of the table, the seat of power that had been empty until now. This was Adrian Thorne, the CEO, the billionaire owner of Titan Enterprises, the man she had slept with. The blood drained from Elena's face. The memory of last night crashed into the reality of the present with the force of a train wreck. She remembered the way his hands had felt, gentle and seeking, contrasted against the cold way he now placed a leather folder on the table. She remembered the whisper of his voice in the dark, confessing he felt lonely at the top, contrasted against the commanding silence he now imposed on his subordinates. She wanted to run. She wanted to dissolve into the carpet. She had left him without a word, without a name, stealing away like a thief because she thought she would never see him again. She thought he was a beautiful mistake. Instead, he was her potential boss. He didn't look at the executives. He didn't look at the view of the city skyline. His eyes, dark and intelligent, locked directly onto hers. There was no shock in his expression, no surprise, just a terrifying, calm recognition. He knew. He had known the moment she walked into the building. Elena gripped the armrests of her chair, her knuckles turning white. She waited for him to expose her. She waited for him to tell the room that this candidate was actually the woman who had slipped out of his bed 5 hours ago. The humiliation would be total. But Adrian didn't speak. He simply pulled out the chair at the head of the table and sat down, his movements fluid and predatory. He picked up her resume, the cheap paper looking ridiculous in his manicured hands. He scanned it, his eyes darting back and forth, unreadable. The silence stretched, becoming a physical thing, a tightrope that Elena was forced to walk. Finally, he looked up. A small ghost of a smile touched the corner of his lips, not the warm smile from the bar, but something sharper, something dangerous. It was a smile that said, "I caught you, Miss Vance." His voice was deep and familiar, sending a shiver of memory down her spine that she had no business feeling in a job interview. The other executives watched, confused by the sudden tension. Adrian leaned forward, resting his chin on his clasped hands, his gaze pinning her to the chair. "This role requires discretion," he said softly, his voice silky and low. "Absolute confidentiality is the cornerstone of my office. So tell me, Miss Elena, are you good at keeping secrets?" 24 hours earlier, Elena Vance was not standing in a corporate boardroom. She was standing in the pouring rain, clutching a crumpled letter that had effectively ended her life. The ink was running, bleeding down the page, turning the word "denied" into a dark, illegible smear, but she didn't need to read it again. She had memorized the rejection. The bank wouldn't extend the loan. The medical bills for her mother's treatments had finally swallowed them whole. There was nowhere left to turn, no distant relative to call, and no miracle waiting in the wings. She was 26 years old, and she felt ancient, worn down by a relentless tide of misfortune that simply refused to recede. She ducked into the lobby of the Ritz-Carlton not because she belonged there, but because she couldn't breathe. The air outside was too heavy with rain and despair. Inside, the hotel smelled of lilies and old money. It was a different universe, a golden cage where bad news didn't exist. Elena smoothed her wet hair, feeling painfully invisible among the guests in their silk gowns and tailored tuxedos. She walked to the bar, a dimly lit sanctuary of mahogany and velvet, and sat in the darkest corner she could find. She ordered the cheapest glass of wine on the menu, a $14 mistake she couldn't afford, and stared at the amber liquid, trying to stop her hands from trembling. She wasn't looking for company. She was looking for a moment of silence before the noise of her crumbling reality started up again. That was when he sat down. He didn't announce his presence. One moment the stool next to her was empty, and the next, it was occupied by a man who carried the weight of the world on shoulders clad in expensive wool. He didn't look at her. He signaled the bartender with a subtle lift of his finger, and ordered a scotch, neat. He looked exhausted, not physically tired, but spiritually drained. He rubbed his temples, his eyes closed, letting out a long, heavy sigh that seemed to vibrate through the wood of the bar. "Long day?" Elena asked. The words slipped out before she could stop them. Normally she kept her head down, but there was something in his posture that mirrored her own defeat. He opened his eyes and looked at her. For a second, he seemed surprised that she had spoken, as if he were used to being surrounded by people who only spoke when spoken to. "You have no idea," he murmured, his voice a deep baritone that warmed the chill in her bones. "Or maybe you do. You look like you're hiding." "I am," Elena admitted, taking a sip of her wine. "I'm hiding from everything outside those doors." "Me too," he said, turning his body slightly toward her. "Tonight, the world outside doesn't exist. That's the rule." They clinked glasses. It was a toast to escapism. They started talking, and the strangest thing happened. They didn't ask the standard questions. He didn't ask what she did for a living, which was a blessing because she didn't want to admit she was an unemployed secretary drowning in debt. She didn't ask who he was, because frankly, she didn't care. In the dim light, he wasn't a CEO or a billionaire. He was just a man with kind eyes and a tired soul. They talked about the rain. They talked about the jazz music drifting from the piano. They talked about the places they would go if they could vanish. He chose the mountains. She chose the ocean. He was captivated by her. Elena could feel his gaze lingering on her face, tracing the curve of her jaw and the damp strands of hair clinging to her neck. He seemed fascinated by her honesty. She didn't flatter him. She didn't laugh at jokes that weren't funny. She challenged him on his opinion of the music. She teased him about his drink choice. For the first time in years, Adrian, though she didn't know his name yet, felt seen as a human being, not an asset. "I don't want to know your name," he said suddenly, about an hour in. His hand brushed hers on the countertop, sending a jolt of electricity straight to her heart. "If we exchange names, we have to exchange histories. We have to become people with responsibilities again. I don't want to be responsible tonight." "No names," Elena agreed, her voice barely a whisper. The anonymity was intoxicating. It made her brave. "Just tonight. Just tonight," he promised. When he invited her up to his suite, it didn't feel sordid. It felt inevitable. It felt like the natural extension of the safe harbor they had built in that dark corner. The elevator ride was silent, charged with a magnetic tension that made the air thick. Inside the penthouse suite, the city lights sprawled below them like scattered diamonds, beautiful and distant. He didn't rush. He treated her with a reverence that made her chest ache. He undressed her slowly, his hands warm and steady, worshipping her skin as if she were something precious, not a woman wearing a thrift store raincoat. The night was a blur of whispered confessions and skin-on-skin salvation. For a few hours, Elena wasn't poor. She wasn't scared. She was desired. She was held. He slept with his arm heavy over her waist, as if afraid she would float away. But morning always comes. Elena woke up at dawn. The gray light filtering through the sheer curtains was a harsh reminder that the world outside was waiting. The eviction notice was still real. The debt was still real. Lying in the arms of this beautiful stranger wouldn't fix her life. It would only make the return to it more painful. Panic set in. She couldn't let him wake up and ask her questions. She couldn't bear the awkwardness of the morning after, the exchange of numbers she would never call, or the pity in his eyes when he saw her shabby clothes in the daylight. She slipped out of bed, moving like a ghost. She dressed quickly, her hands shaking as she buttoned her coat. She looked at him one last time, his dark hair messy against the white pillow, his face relaxed in sleep. He looked younger, softer. She wanted to kiss his forehead, but she didn't dare. She had to leave the fantasy intact. She grabbed her purse and tiptoed to the door. In her haste, she didn't notice that her silver earring, a small, delicate hoop that had been her grandmother's, had fallen onto the nightstand, right next to his gold watch. Elena stepped out into the hallway and let the heavy door click shut. She walked away from the best night of her life, stepping back into the storm, convinced she would never see the man with the sad eyes again. She thought she had escaped cleanly. She had no idea she had just left a breadcrumb trail straight back to her heart. Elena's alarm clock didn't buzz, it screamed. A harsh, metallic rattle that shook the thin bedside table and dragged her out of a fitful sleep. She blinked open her eyes, expecting for a split second to see the vaulted ceiling of the penthouse suite, the silk drapes, and the soft morning light. Instead, she was staring at a water stain on the plaster that looked vaguely like a map of a country that didn't exist. The smell of lavender and expensive cologne was gone, replaced by the scent of stale toast and the damp, musty odor that permeated the basement apartment no matter how much she scrubbed. She sat up, the cheap mattress springs digging into her back. The contrast was a physical blow. Just hours ago, she had been wrapped in luxury so profound it felt like a dream. Now, she was back in the box she called home. A 300-square-foot studio with a window that looked out onto a brick wall and a radiator that hissed but provided no heat. She swung her legs over the edge of the bed, her feet hitting the cold linoleum. "Stupid," she whispered to the empty room. "Reckless." She chided herself for the night before, for playing princess when she was barely keeping her head above water. But even as she scolded herself, a warmth bloomed in her chest. She couldn't regret it. For one night she hadn't been the poor girl with the sick mother and the mounting debt. She had just been Elena. And he, whoever he was, had made her feel like a queen. But queens didn't have eviction notices taped to their refrigerators. Elena walked to the kitchenette, stepping over a pile of unpaid bills she had sorted by urgency. The red ones were critical. The white ones could wait another week. She filled the kettle with tap water, listening to the pipes groan. She needed to focus. Today was the interview at Titan Enterprises. It was a long shot, a position as the executive assistant to the CEO. The salary was life-changing. It was enough to pay off the back rent, cover her mother's next round of specialists, and maybe, just maybe, buy a winter coat that actually zipped up. She moved into her preparation routine with military precision. This was where Elena shined. She wasn't just desperate, she was brilliant. She had graduated top of her class, managed offices that ran on chaos, and could organize a schedule better than a computer algorithm. She pulled her interview suit out of the plastic garment bag. It was secondhand, but she had spent 3 hours tailoring it herself, taking in the waist and hemming the cuffs so it fit her frame perfectly. She set up her ironing board, pressing the white blouse with surgical care. A wrinkle could cost her the job. A stain could cost her everything. While the iron hissed, she recited the facts she had memorized about Titan Enterprises. Founded in 1995. Market cap of $4 billion. Currently acquiring logistics firms in Eastern Europe. The CEO is known for being ruthless, private, and demanding. She knew his public profile. Though she had never seen a clear photo of him, he notoriously avoided the press. She knew his schedule patterns based on public filings. She knew his company's mission statement better than the HR director probably did. She wasn't going in there to beg. She was going in there to prove that she was the best investment they could make. She practiced her answers in the cracked bathroom mirror, refining her tone. She had to be confident but deferential, smart but not threatening. She applied her makeup sparingly, hiding the dark circles under her eyes with the last of her concealer. She pulled her dark hair back into a severe, professional bun, securing every stray strand. She looked at her reflection. She looked capable. She looked like someone who belonged in a high-rise, not a basement. She took a deep breath, trying to steady the tremors in her hands. "You can do this," she told the woman in the mirror. "You have to do this." She grabbed her purse and her portfolio, checking the time. She had to catch the 8:05 bus to be there 15 minutes early. Being on time was late, being early was on time. She reached up to put on her jewelry, her only valuable possession. It was a pair of small silver hoop earrings with tiny pearl inlays, a gift from her grandmother before she passed. They were her good luck charms. She felt for the left one. It was there. She reached for the right earlobe. Her fingers met nothing but skin. Elena froze. Her heart skipped a beat, then hammered against her ribs. She dropped her bag and ran back to the bathroom, checking the sink ledge. Nothing. She checked the nightstand. Nothing. She dropped to her knees, frantically patting the worn carpet, checking under the bed, and sweeping her hands over the sheets. "No, no, no!" she whimpered, tears pricking her eyes. The panic was immediate and sharp. Those earrings were the only thing she had left of her family's past, the only thing she hadn't pawned when the medical bills started piling up. She checked her coat pockets. Empty. Then, the image flashed in her mind. The hotel room. The bedside table is made of dark marble. The way she had hurriedly dressed in the dark, grabbing her things in a rush to escape before he woke up. She must have left it there. She sat back on her heels, the realization crushing her. It was gone. She couldn't go back to the Ritz-Carlton. She couldn't march up to the penthouse and ask a stranger for her earring. It was probably already swept up by housekeeping or thrown in the trash. The loss felt like a physical ache, a bad omen starting her day. But she looked at the clock. 8 a.m. If she kept looking, she would miss the bus. If she missed the bus, she missed the interview. She stood up, wiping her eyes. She took off the remaining left earring and placed it gently in her jewelry box. A mismatched pair was unprofessional. She would have to go without them. She would have to go without her armor. Elena squared her shoulders, swallowed the grief, and walked out the door. She had lost a piece of her past, but she couldn't afford to lose her future too. But the game was about to get dangerous. When Adrian asked for his coffee with a dash of cinnamon, Elena realized he wasn't just her boss, he was hunting her. And the mistake she makes next? It almost costs her everything. The silence in the boardroom was absolute. Adrian Thorne leaned back in his leather chair, his fingers steepled, his eyes fixed on Elena with an intensity that made the air in the room feel thin. The question hung between them like a guillotine blade. "Are you good at keeping secrets?" Elena's heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs, but her face remained a mask of polite professionalism. She knew exactly what secret he was referring to. It wasn't about corporate espionage or insider trading. It was about the way she had signed his name in the dark. It was about the fact that the CEO of this multi-billion-dollar empire had been vulnerable with a stranger in a hotel bar. If she blushed, if she faltered, if she acknowledged the shared memory for even a second, she knew it would be over. "My previous employers would describe me as a vault, Mr. Thorne," Elena replied, her voice steady, though her hands were clenched so tightly in her lap that her nails dug into her palms. "Discretion is not just a skill, it's a character trait." Adrian's lips twitched. It was a micro-expression, barely there, but she saw the amusement dancing in his dark eyes. He turned his head slowly to the severe woman with the glasses, the HR director, Mrs. Gable. "She's hired," Adrian said simply. Mrs. Gable sputtered, her pen hovering over her notepad. "Mr. Thorne, with all due respect, we haven't even reviewed her references. Her resume shows significant gaps in employment, and her experience is hardly at the level we typically require for a C-suite executive assistant. We have candidates from Harvard who—" "I don't need Harvard," Adrian cut her off, his voice dropping to a temperature that could freeze water. "I need someone who understands the value of silence. Miss Vance starts immediately. Show her to her desk." He stood up, signaling the end of the discussion. As he walked past Elena, he paused for a fraction of a second. He didn't look at her, but the scent of his cologne, sandalwood and rain, washed over her, instantly transporting her back to the hotel pillows. "Don't disappoint me, Elena," he murmured, low enough that only she could hear. Then he was gone. The first week was a master class in psychological warfare. Elena was given a desk right outside Adrian's massive glass-walled office. It was a position of power, guarding the gate to the king, but for Elena, it felt like being a mouse in a glass cage with a very patient, very hungry cat. She worked with frantic efficiency. She organized his calendar, color-coding meetings with military precision. She anticipated his needs before he voiced them. She was the perfect employee, invisible, competent, and robotic. Adrian, however, refused to let her be a robot. On Tuesday, he called her into his office. He was standing by the window, looking out at the city, his back to her. "I need coffee," he said, not turning around. "Of course, Mr. Thorne. How do you take it?" Elena asked, pen poised over her notepad. He turned then, a small, knowing smile playing on his lips. Black, 2 sugars, a dash of cinnamon. Elena froze. Her pen stopped moving. That was her order. That was exactly what she had ordered from room service the morning she had fled. He didn't drink his coffee like that. Everyone knew Adrian Thorne drank espresso, bitter and strong. He was mocking her. He was testing to see if she would break. Is that your usual preference, sir? She asked, forcing her voice to remain neutral. It's a new preference, he said smoothly, walking towards his desk and leaning against the edge, crossing his arms. I tried it recently. It reminded me of a very unexpected morning. I found it quite sweet. Don't you agree? I wouldn't know, sir. Elena lied, her cheeks burning. I'll fetch it immediately. She fled the office, her heart racing. He was playing with her. He was enjoying watching her squirm, testing the limits of her composure. Every interaction was a double-edged sword. When she brought him the files for the upcoming merger, he didn't just thank her. He looked at her hands, his gaze lingering on her wrists, remembering where he had held her. On Thursday, he asked her to transcribe a personal letter to a business associate. He dictated it while pacing the room, his voice hypnotic. Dear Charles, sometimes the most valuable assets are the ones we stumble upon by accident. We search for structure, but we find ourselves captivated by chaos. I recently encountered an opportunity that I initially thought was fleeting, a temporary venture. But upon further review, I realized that letting it walk away would be a strategic error. Some investments require patience. I intend to be very patient. Elena typed the words, her fingers trembling on the keys. He wasn't talking about business. He was talking about her. She kept her eyes glued to the screen, terrified that if she looked up, she would see him watching her reaction. Did you catch all that, Elena? He asked, stopping right beside her chair. He was close. Too close. She could feel the heat radiating from his body. Yes, Mr. Thorne, she whispered. Good. Send it. By Friday, Elena was a wreck of nerves. The contrast between his public persona and his private torture was maddening. To the rest of the office, he was the terrifying, untouchable CEO. To her, he was a predator toying with his food. He gave her tasks that forced proximity, fixing his collar before a televised interview, organizing the private bookshelf in the corner of his office while he worked silently at his desk. He never crossed the line of professionalism explicitly, but he danced right on the edge of it, daring her to push him back. But she couldn't. She needed this paycheck. The first deposit had hit her account that morning, and she had immediately paid the rent and the overdue electric bill. The relief was intoxicating. She couldn't lose this job. So she swallowed her pride, ignored the burning tension, and played the part of the oblivious secretary perfectly. It was late Friday evening. The office was empty. The lights in the bullpen had dimmed automatically, leaving only the glow of the city outside and the lamp on Elena's desk. She was finishing up the filing, exhausted but determined to leave a clean desk for Monday. The door to Adrian's office opened. He stood in the doorway, loosened his tie, and unbuttoned the top button of his shirt. He looked tired, the mask of the CEO slipping just slightly to reveal the man underneath, the man she had met in the bar. You're still here, he observed, his voice soft in the quiet office. Just finishing up, sir, Elena said, stacking the last of the folders. I didn't want to leave anything pending. You work hard, he said, walking slowly towards her desk. He stopped in front of it, placing his hands on the polished wood, leaning in. Most people would have run by now. I'm not an easy man to work for. I need this job, Mr. Thorne, Elena said honestly, looking up at him. I can handle hard work. I know you can, he murmured. His eyes dropped to her lips, then back up to her eyes. The air between them crackled with electricity. It was the first time since the interview that the playfulness was gone, replaced by a raw, hungry tension. But tell me, Elena, how long can you keep pretending that we're strangers? As long as you pay me to be a stranger, sir, she replied, her voice shaking slightly but her chin held high. Adrian laughed, a low, genuine sound that did dangerous things to her heart. Touché. He pushed off the desk, straightening up. Go home, Elena. Get some rest. Next week is going to be much more demanding. He turned and walked back into his office, leaving her sitting in the dim light, breathless and terrified, wondering just what kind of demands he had in mind. The following week, the atmosphere at Titan Enterprises shifted from simmering tension to all-out crisis. The acquisition of the logistics firm in Eastern Europe, Project Chimera, hit a critical snag. Contracts were missing, translation errors were causing legal standoffs, and the lead negotiator on the other side, a notoriously volatile oligarch named Mr. Volkov, was threatening to walk away from the table. The executive floor was a blur of panicked VPs and shouting matches. This was the moment Elena stopped being the new girl and became indispensable. While the senior executives ran around like headless chickens, Elena quietly picked up the phone. She didn't panic. She didn't shout. She simply pulled the master file she had spent the weekend reorganizing, color-coded, cross-referenced, and digitized. She located the missing addendum in under 3 minutes, a document the legal team had been hunting for 3 days. But she didn't stop there. When Mr. Volkov called, screaming in rapid-fire Russian that the VP of sales couldn't understand, Elena put the call on speaker. Mr. Volkov. She spoke into the polycom, her voice calm and melodic. To the shock of everyone in the room, she wasn't speaking English. She was speaking fluent Russian, a skill she had picked up from her grandmother and honed during her years of freelance translation work to pay the bills. The room went dead silent. The executives stared at her as if she had grown a second head. She listened to Volkov's tirade, nodding patiently, jotting down notes. Then, she responded. She wasn't just translating, she was negotiating. She smoothed over the insult caused by the previous email, clarified the terms of the escrow account, and even made a small, cultural joke that caused the angry oligarch to bark out a laugh on the other end of the line. He says the deal is back on, Elena said, switching back to English as she hung up the phone. She looked around the room, smoothing her skirt. He just wants the revised contract by noon. I've already drafted it. It's in your inbox, Mr. Henderson. From inside his glass office, Adrian watched the entire scene unfold. He wasn't looking at the contract. He was looking at her. There was no smirk on his face today, no playful teasing. It was pure, unadulterated admiration. He watched her command the room with a quiet grace that none of his Ivy League executives possessed. He saw the competence beneath the cheap suit, the steel spine beneath the soft exterior. It wasn't just lust anymore, it was respect. And for a man like Adrian Thorne, respect was a far rarer currency. But competence breeds envy, and Elena had just painted a target on her back. Enter Vanessa Sterling. Vanessa was the vice president of marketing, a woman who treated the corporate ladder like a runway and her subordinates like dirt. She was beautiful, sharp-tongued, and rumored to be Adrian's former flame, or at least, she acted like she was. She had watched Elena's performance with Mr. Volkov not with relief, but with narrowing eyes. A competent assistant was a threat. A beautiful, competent assistant who had the CEO's attention was an enemy. Later that afternoon, during a strategy meeting, Vanessa struck. The room was full. Adrian sat at the head of the table, listening as Vanessa presented the new branding strategy. Elena was in the corner, taking minutes. And of course, Vanessa said, pausing to sip her sparkling water, we need to ensure that the image of Titan Enterprises remains pristine, which brings me to a small housekeeping issue. She turned her chair, directing her laser-focused glare directly at Elena. Mr. Thorne, I understand we are trying to be charitable with our hiring practices, but surely we have standards for presentation? It is distracting to have staff members who look like they are dressed in the dark at a discount bin. The insult was precise and cruel. It wasn't about Elena's work, it was about her poverty. The room went uncomfortably quiet. Several executives shifted in their seats, looking at their papers. Elena felt the blood rush to her face, a hot wave of humiliation. She looked down at her skirt, the same one she had carefully ironed that morning, and suddenly felt small, dirty, unworthy. She looked at Adrian, praying for him to say something. to tell Vanessa to stop, to defend her. Adrian didn't move. His face was a mask of stone. He looked at Vanessa, then he looked at Elena, his expression unreadable. He tapped his pen on the table, once, twice. Then he looked back at the presentation screen. "Continue with the marketing figures, Vanessa," Adrian said calmly. That was it. No defense. No outrage. He just let it happen. Elena felt something crack inside her chest. She kept typing the minutes, her fingers stiff, her vision blurring with unshed tears. She had thought he respected her. She had thought they had a connection. But clearly, to him, she was just hired help, replaceable, insultable. She swallowed the lump in her throat, enduring the rest of the meeting in agonizing silence, while Vanessa smirked, victorious. When the meeting ended, Elena fled to the restroom to splash cold water on her burning face. She didn't see what happened next. As the room cleared out, Adrian remained seated. "Vanessa," he said, his voice deceptively light. "Stay a moment." Vanessa paused at the door, tossing her hair over her shoulder, a triumphant smile on her lips. She walked back to him, swaying her hips. "Yes, Adrian? I hope you didn't mind me speaking up. I just think the brand needs to be protected from." "Sit down," Adrian commanded. The lightness was gone. His voice was a whip crack. Vanessa blinked, her smile faltering, and sat. Adrian stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the gray sky. "You are very good at your job, Vanessa. Your numbers are excellent." "Thank you," she preened. However, Adrian turned, and the look in his eyes was terrifying. It was cold, absolute, and ruthless. "You seem to have misunderstood the culture of my company. You attacked a member of my team today. A member who, frankly, contributes more value in a single phone call than you have in the last quarter." Vanessa's mouth dropped open. "Adrian, she's just a secretary. Look at her, she is brilliant." Adrian interrupted, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. "And she possesses a dignity you clearly lack. I don't pay you to critique wardrobes, Vanessa. I pay you to work. If you ever, and I mean ever, speak to her or anyone else with that level of disrespect again, you won't just be fired. I will ensure you never work in this city again. Do I make myself clear?" Vanessa went pale, shrinking back into her chair. Yes, Adrian. Get out." Vanessa scrambled out of the room, looking like she had seen a ghost. Adrian remained standing by the window, adjusting his cufflinks. He hated bullies, but more than that, he hated the look of hurt in Elena's eyes. He hadn't defended her publicly because he knew it would only fuel the rumors, making her look like his pet rather than his employee. He needed her to stand on her own merit. But in private? In private, he would burn the world down for her. He walked back to his desk and pressed the intercom button. "Elena?" "Yes, Mr. Thorne?" Her voice was thick, like she had been crying. "Please come in. Bring your notebook." He waited for the door to open, plotting his next move. He had to fix this. He had to make it right without breaking their secret. The game had just gotten personal. Elena thought she was safe on the private jet, but a single phone call from the hospital was about to shatter the fantasy. What she does when they land destroys the trust they built, turning the warm CO into the ruthless Ice King. The itinerary hit Elena's inbox at 6 a.m. on Monday morning. Urgent client summit. Location, Seattle. Duration, 48 hours. Attendees A. Thorne E. Vance. There was no time to panic, no time to prepare excuses. By 9 a.m., Elena was strapping herself into the cream leather seat of the Titan Enterprises private jet. The cabin was an exercise in obscene wealth. Polished walnut tables, crystal decanters strapped into secure mounts, and a silence so profound it felt pressurized. They were alone. The pilot was behind a locked door. The flight attendant had vanished into the galley after serving espresso. It was just Elena, Adrian, and 30,000 feet of empty sky. The dynamic shifted the moment the wheels left the tarmac. In the office, there were barriers, desks, phones, other people. Here, there was nowhere to look but at him. Adrian had discarded his suit jacket. He was sitting across from her, his shirt sleeves rolled up to his elbows, revealing forearms that were distractingly strong. He wasn't working. His laptop was closed. He was just watching her, with that same intense, unreadable gaze that made her skin prickle. "You're nervous," he stated, not as a question but as a fact. "I've never flown private before, sir." Elena deflected, clutching her tablet like a life raft. "It's not the plane, Elena," he said softly. "It's me." He unbuckled his seatbelt and moved to the seat directly next to her. The sudden proximity sucked the air out of her lungs. She could smell him, that intoxicating mix of sandalwood and rain that haunted her dreams. He was close enough that his knee brushed against hers, a point of contact that sent a jolt of electricity straight up her leg. She stiffened, trying to pull away, but there was nowhere to go. "Stop calling me sir," he said, his voice dropping an octave. "We aren't in the office. There's no HR director here. No Vanessa. Just us." Elena turned to look at him, her defenses crumbling under the weight of his stare. "What do you want from me, Adrian?" The name slipped out, unauthorized and intimate. "I want to know why you ran," he asked. The playfulness was gone. The smirk that usually danced on his lips had vanished, replaced by a raw, naked vulnerability that shocked her. He didn't look like a billionaire demanding answers. He looked like a man who had been bruised. Elena blinked, confused. I had to get to work. I had responsibilities." "No." He shook his head slowly. "You didn't just leave. You escaped. I woke up, and the room was empty. It was like you were never there. Do you have any idea how that felt?" He leaned in closer, his eyes searching hers. "I opened up to you that night. I told you things I haven't told anyone in 10 years, and when I woke up I felt discarded." The word hung in the air between them. Discarded. It flipped the entire narrative in Elena's head. She had spent the last week terrified that he saw her as a cheap conquest, a one-night stand he was toying with. She had assumed his silence was a power play. She never imagined that he was hurt. She never imagined that the great Adrian Thorne could be hurt by a girl with a thrift store skirt. "I didn't discard you," she whispered, her voice trembling. Tears pricked her eyes. "I ran because I was scared, Adrian. Look at this." She gestured around the cabin. "Look at you. You own the sky. And I'm worrying about paying for electricity. I woke up in that hotel room and realized I didn't belong in your world. I thought if I stayed, I would just be a story you told your friends. A charity case. I wanted to keep the memory pure. I wanted to leave before you realized I wasn't enough." Adrian's expression softened, the hurt replaced by a fierce intensity. He reached out, his hand covering hers on the armrest. His grip was warm and solid. "You think this matters?" He gestured dismissively at the jet. "This is just noise, Elena. It's stuff. That night, what we had, that was real. You were the only real thing I felt in a long time. I don't care about your bank account. I care about the way you looked at me when you thought I wasn't watching." The confession shattered the last of her resistance. The professional wall she had built brick by brick crumbled into dust. They were just a man and a woman again, suspended in the clouds, bound by a magnetic pull that defied logic. "I didn't want to leave," she admitted, a tear escaping and trailing down her cheek. Adrian reached up, his thumb brushing the tear away, his touch scorching her skin. "Then don't leave now." He leaned in. The gap between them closed to inches. Elena's breath hitched. She could feel the heat radiating from him and see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. She wanted him. God, she wanted him more than she wanted the job, more than she wanted safety. She leaned forward, her lips parting, surrendering to the inevitable. The tension that had been building for a week was about to snap in the most beautiful way possible. Brrrring, brrrring. The harsh, jarring sound of a cell phone cut through the moment like a siren. They both froze. Adrian squeezed his eyes shut, a look of pained frustration crossing his face. He pulled back slightly, exhaling a ragged breath. "Ignore it," he muttered. But Elena couldn't. It wasn't her work phone. It was her personal cell, the cheap burner she kept for emergencies. Only one place had that number. "I can't," she whispered, panic instantly replacing passion. She scrambled for her bag, her hands shaking as she dug out the ringing phone. "It's the hospital. The mood in the cabin evaporated instantly. The romantic haze was sucked out the airlock, replaced by the cold, hard reality of Elena's life. She answered the phone, turning away from Adrian, curling in on herself. "Hello? Yes, this is Elena." She listened, her face straining of color. "What do you mean immediate transfer?" "No, I paid the last installment. Please, you can't move her. She's too weak. Please, just give me 2 days. I'll fix it. I promise." She hung up, the silence in the cabin now heavy and suffocating. She stared at the phone in her lap, her hands trembling uncontrollably. The moment with Adrian, the vulnerability, the almost kiss, felt like it had happened a lifetime ago. Reality had just crashed the party. "Elena?" Adrian's voice was gentle and concerned. He reached out to touch her shoulder. She flinched away, standing up abruptly. She couldn't let him help. If he helped, the power dynamic would shift forever. She would become the charity case she feared being. She had to fix this herself. She had to be strong. "I need to use the restroom," she choked out, grabbing her bag and rushing toward the back of the plane before he could see the fresh wave of tears spilling from her eyes. She locked the door and slid down to the floor, pressing her hands over her mouth to stifle a sob. The bubble had burst. They weren't just a man and a woman anymore. He was the billionaire, and she was the desperate girl who couldn't even keep her family safe. And the distance between them suddenly felt wider than the sky outside. The return from Seattle was a blur of misery. The intimacy of the private jet had evaporated, replaced by a wall of ice that Elena had constructed herself. She had spent the flight typing furiously on her laptop, making frantic arrangements for her mother's care, ignoring Adrian's attempts to catch her eye. When they landed, she declined his offer of a ride home, citing personal errands. She saw the flash of hurt in his eyes before it hardened into something colder, but she turned away. She couldn't afford to be soft. Softness required safety, and right now, Elena was in a war zone. The next 3 days were a nightmare. The facility where her mother was staying had raised their rates unexpectedly, a clerical error that they refused to correct until the bill was paid in full. It was extortion, plain and simple, but Elena was powerless. She spent her lunch breaks on the phone, pleading with administrators, liquidation companies, and loan sharks whose numbers she found on tear-off flyers at the laundromat. She was sleeping 3 hours a night. Her eyes were rimmed with red, her skin pale, and her focus shattering. But she refused to tell Adrian. In her mind, asking him for help was the final surrender. It would confirm everything she feared, that she was a liability, a gold digger, a woman who needed saving. She wanted his respect more than his money. She wanted to stand beside him, not beneath him. So she kept her mouth shut, masked her panic with concealer, and drowned in silence. Adrian, however, didn't see a woman fighting for survival. He saw a woman pulling away. He had opened a vein on that plane. He had told her she mattered. He had tried to kiss her, and she had run to the bathroom and then frozen him out for days. To a man used to being wanted for his wallet, Elena's withdrawal looked suspicious. He saw her whispering on the phone in hushed, desperate tones. He saw her rushing out the door the second the clock struck 5. He saw the shadows under her eyes and assumed they were from late nights spent with someone else. The misunderstanding festered like a wound. By Wednesday, the atmosphere in the office was toxic. The warm CEO who had teased her about coffee orders was gone. In his place was the Ice King of Titan Enterprises, the ruthless, unfeeling tyrant the business magazines wrote about. "This report is garbage," Adrian said, tossing a file onto Elena's desk without looking at her. The sound of the folder hitting the wood was like a gunshot in the quiet office. Elena flinched, looking up from her computer. "I followed the template you provided, sir." "Then the template is wrong. Fix it," he snapped, walking past her into his office and slamming the door. The glass walls didn't block the sound of him pacing, angry and restless. Elena stared at the closed door, her heart aching. It wasn't just the criticism, it was the cruelty. He was punishing her. He was shutting her out just as she had shut him out, but he had the power to make it hurt professionally. Every cold glance, every clipped sentence, and every demand was a reminder that she had ruined it. She had ruined the magic of the hotel, the camaraderie of the first week, and the potential of the plane ride. "He hates me," she whispered to herself, blinking back tears. "He thinks I'm incompetent. He thinks I'm just like everyone else." She corrected the report, her hands shaking. She delivered it to his desk when he was in a meeting, avoiding his gaze. She became a ghost in the office, moving silently, speaking only when spoken to. The breaking point came on Friday morning. Elena was in the break room, making coffee, black, 2 sugars, a dash of cinnamon, hoping the peace offering might soften him. She overheard 2 junior executives talking by the water cooler. "Did you see the boss today? Someone clearly woke up on the wrong side of the bed." "Yeah, I heard he's back on the market." "That thing with the socialite? Over. Probably taking it out on everyone. Though, I saw him leaving late last night. Maybe he's got a new flavor of the month." The casual gossip pierced Elena's chest. Flavor of the month. That's what she was to him. A brief distraction. And now that she had become difficult with her personal drama, he was bored. He was moving on. The coldness didn't hurt feelings. It was indifference. He was done with the game. Elena poured the coffee down the sink. The cinnamon swirled away into the drain, a bitter metaphor for her hopes. She walked back to her desk, her resolve hardening into a brittle, painful shell. She couldn't do this anymore. She couldn't watch him look at her with dead eyes. She couldn't handle the crushing weight of her secret life colliding with his indifference. It was too much pain for one heart to hold. She opened a blank document on her computer. Her fingers hovered over the keys, trembling. To Adrian Thorne from Elena Vance. Subject: Resignation. Dear Mr. Thorne, please accept this letter as formal notification that I am resigning from my position as executive assistant, effective immediately. Due to personal circumstances, I am unable to continue. She typed the words, each one feeling like she was carving out a piece of her soul. She needed the money. God, she needed the money. But she couldn't stay here and be hated by the man she was falling in love with. She would find another way. Waitressing, cleaning, anything. Anything was better than this cold silence. She printed the letter. The sound of the printer whirring was loud in the tense quiet. She picked up the warm sheet of paper, folded it precisely in half, and stood up. She would leave it on his desk while he was at lunch. She would leave just like she had left the hotel, quietly, without a scene, disappearing before he could hurt her anymore. She walked toward the glass door, her hand reaching for the handle, unaware that on the other side, Adrian was staring at the surveillance feed of the outer office, watching her approach with a look of utter devastation. She was typing her resignation letter, ready to give up, but she had no idea that Adrian had been investigating her life behind her back. When she storms into his office to confront him, he reveals a secret item from his desk drawer that changes the entire story. Elena's hand was on the brass doorknob of Adrian's office when her cell phone buzzed in her pocket. It was a long, sustained vibration, demanding attention. She froze, the resignation letter crinkling in her other hand. It was the hospital again. Her stomach dropped. Had they moved her mother? Had they put her out on the street? She stepped back from the door, retreating to the safety of her desk to answer. "I told you," she hissed into the phone, her voice thick with suppressed panic. "I'm getting the money. Please, just don't move her." "Miss Vance?" The voice on the other end was different this time. It wasn't the harried billing administrator. It was Dr. Aris, the chief specialist. His tone was calm, almost cheerful. "I think there's been a misunderstanding. We aren't moving your mother to a state facility. We're preparing her for transport to the Swiss Neurological Institute in Zurich." Preparing her for transport to the Swiss Neurological Institute in Zurich. Elena blinked, the world tilting on its axis. "Zurich? I don't understand. I can't afford Zurich. I can't even afford the bed she's in now." "It's already taken care of, Elena," Dr. Aris said gently. "The account was settled in full this morning. Past due balances, the transfer fees, and 6 months of advanced treatment at the institute. It was an anonymous wire transfer. We assumed you had arranged it." The phone slipped from Elena's fingers, clattering onto the desk. The silence in the office was deafening. Anonymous wire transfer. There was only one person in her life with that kind of power. Only one person knew she was drowning, even if she had never said the words out loud. Rage, hot and blinding, surged through her veins. It wasn't relief she felt, it was shame, humiliation. He had found out. He had looked into her life, seen the pathetic mess of her finances, the sick mother, the desperate scrambling, and he had thrown money at the problem like it was a charity tax write-off. He hadn't asked her. He hadn't offered. He had just bought her problems away. It felt like he was buying her. She grabbed the resignation letter, crumpled it into a ball, and threw it in the trash. She didn't need a letter anymore. She needed to scream. She didn't knock. She threw the door to his office open with enough force that it banged against the glass wall. Adrian was sitting at his desk, reviewing a stack of documents. He looked up, startled by the intrusion, his expression shifting from surprise to wariness as he saw the fire in her eyes. "Elena? How dare you?" she seethed, marching across the plush carpet until she was standing directly in front of his massive mahogany desk. Her chest was heaving, her hands balled into fists at her sides. "Who gave you the right? Who gave you the right to investigate my life?" Adrian stood up slowly, removing his glasses. He didn't look angry. He looked calm, resolute. "I took it to the hospital." "Don't play innocent," Elena shouted, her voice cracking. "You paid them. You paid for everything. What is this, Adrian? Is this how you handle your employees? You find out they're poor, and you fix them? Am I a broken printer you just decided to repair?" "You were drowning," Adrian said, his voice low and steady, contrasting sharply with her hysteria. He walked around the desk, closing the distance between them. "I saw you. Every day this week, I watched you dying inside. I didn't know why. You wouldn't talk to me. You shut me out. So yes, I looked. I had my security team run a background check. I found the debts. I found the medical records. You had no right," Elena cried, tears finally spilling over. "I wanted to earn this job. I wanted you to respect me. No. Now I'm just another thing you bought. I'm just a charity case. Is that what you think?" Adrian stopped a foot away from her. His eyes were dark, burning with an intensity that silenced her. "You think I did this for charity? You think I care about the money? Then why?" she demanded, wiping furiously at her cheeks. "Why go to all this trouble for a secretary you've known for 2 weeks?" "Because I haven't known you for 2 weeks," Adrian said softly. He reached into his pocket and pulled out something small and silver. He held it out to her. Resting in the center of his palm was a silver hoop earring with a tiny pearl inlay. Elena gasped. The air left her lungs. She stared at the earring, the one she had lost at the hotel, the one she thought was gone forever. "I didn't find you by accident, Elena," Adrian confessed, his voice rough with emotion. "When you left that morning, I tore that room apart looking for you. I didn't know your name. I didn't know your number. All I had was this earring and the memory of the smartest, most genuine woman I had ever met. I spent 3 weeks looking for you. I checked security footage from the hotel lobby. I used facial recognition software. I found your application in the reject pile of HR because you didn't have a degree. I pulled it out. I set up the interview. I sat in that chair waiting for you to walk through that door." Elena stared at him, stunned into silence. Her anger drained away, replaced by a shock so profound she felt dizzy. You were looking for me? I never stopped looking for you," he vowed. He took her hand, pressing the earring into her palm and closing her fingers over it. His touch was electric, grounding her. "I didn't pay those bills because I pity you, Elena. I paid them because I couldn't stand watching the woman I'm falling in love with suffer in silence. I didn't want to buy you. I wanted to free you. I wanted you to look at me again without fear in your eyes." The confession hung in the air, heavy and beautiful. "The woman I'm falling in love with." Elena looked at him, really looked at him. She saw the exhaustion in his eyes, the desperation that mirrored her own. He wasn't the Ice King. He wasn't the billionaire savior. He was just Adrian, the man from the bar. The man who had moved heaven and earth just to find her again. "You idiot!" she whispered, a watery smile breaking through her tears. You absolute idiot. Guilty, he murmured, a smile tugging at his own lips. The distance between them vanished. Elena didn't retreat this time. She stepped forward, crashing into him. Adrian caught her, his arms wrapping around her waist, pulling her flush against his chest. He buried his face in her neck, breathing her in like she was oxygen. Don't ever run from me again, he groaned against her skin. I won't, she promised, clutching the lapels of his jacket. I'm not going anywhere. And then he kissed her. It wasn't the tentative, careful kiss of the airplane. It was a claim. A collision of relief and passion that set the office on fire. It was the answer to every question, the solution to every secret. They were no longer boss and employee, no longer rich and poor. They were just two people who had found their way back to the start. The kiss in the office was the beginning of the truth, but the world outside was still built on lies. And lies, like weeds, have a way of spreading if they aren't pulled out by the root. News of Elena's sudden financial windfall and her closeness to the CEO began to circulate through the grapevine of Titan Enterprises. It started as whispers in the break room, then escalated to anonymous emails, and finally, it landed on the front page of a notorious industry gossip blog. The headline was brutal. The Titan's new toy. Is the CEO's assistant sleeping her way to a promotion? The source was anonymous, but the tone was unmistakable. It was Vanessa Sterling. She hadn't taken her warning to heart. She had taken it as a declaration of war. She had leaked details about Elena's debts, her lack of a degree, and the sudden payment of her mother's medical bills, painting a picture of a desperate gold digger ensnaring a lonely billionaire. Elena arrived at the office on Monday morning to a gauntlet of stares. The security guard avoided her eyes. The receptionist stopped talking when she walked by. She felt naked, exposed, the shame of her poverty weaponized against her. She walked to her desk with her head held high, but inside she was crumbling. She had feared this. She had feared that her love for Adrian would be reduced to a transaction in the eyes of the world. She found Adrian in his office, staring at a tablet, his face a mask of thunderous fury. He looked up as she entered, and the anger in his eyes softened instantly into concern. Don't read it, he commanded, standing up and moving toward her. I already did, Elena said quietly. She placed her bag on the chair. It's everywhere, Adrian. They think I'm using you. I don't care what they think, Adrian growled, reaching for her hands. I know the truth. I know who you are. But it matters, Elena insisted, pulling away gently. This affects your reputation. Your company. The board will be furious. Maybe I should resign. Just until this blows over. Adrian went still. The air in the room grew heavy. Resign? He repeated, the word tasting like poison. You think the solution to a bully is to run away? You think I would let you walk out that door to save my reputation? He walked back to his desk and pressed the intercom button. Mrs. Gable? Yes, Mr. Thorne? The HR director's voice trembled slightly. Organize a press conference. The main atrium. 1 hour. Invite the business journals. And make sure Vanessa Sterling is in the front row. Sir? The PR team advises against. Do it. 1 hour later, the atrium of Titan Enterprises was packed. Cameras flashed, reporters jostled for position, and the entire staff watched from the upper balconies. Vanessa stood near the front, looking smug, expecting a damage control speech where Adrian would distance himself from the scandal and perhaps announce Elena's dismissal. Elena stood in the wings, hidden by a heavy velvet curtain, her heart pounding so hard she thought she might faint. Adrian had asked her to trust him. He had asked her to stand by his side. But she had no idea what he was planning. Adrian walked onto the stage. He didn't look like a man under siege. He looked like a king. He stood at the podium, waiting for the silence to settle. He didn't have any notes. There have been rumors circulating today, Adrian began, his voice amplified, echoing through the vast space. Rumors regarding my personal life and the integrity of my staff. I am not here to address gossip. I am here to correct the record. He paused, scanning the crowd until his eyes landed on Vanessa. She smirked, waiting for the axe to fall on Elena. Titan Enterprises is built on value. Adrian continued. We value intelligence. We value resilience. We value truth. Recently, a narrative has been constructed that suggests Ms. Elena Vance obtained her position here through inappropriate means. A murmur rippled through the crowd. The truth, Adrian said, his voice rising with authority, is that Ms. Vance is the single most competent individual I have ever had the privilege of employing. In 2 weeks, she salvaged the Project Chimera deal. She reorganized our archival system. She navigated complex international negotiations in a language most of you do not speak. She did all of this while facing personal hardships that would have broken a lesser person. He turned toward the curtain, extending his hand. Elena, please. Elena froze. He was calling her out. He was putting her in the spotlight. Her legs felt like lead, but the look in his eyes, pleading, proud, loving, pulled her forward. She stepped out from the curtain, walking into the blinding lights. The room went silent. She took his hand, and he pulled her to stand right next to him, not behind him. This woman, Adrian said, gripping her hand tightly, lifting it for everyone to see, is not my toy. She is my partner, in every sense of the word. The crowd gasped. Flashbulbs erupted like a supernova. She is the future of this company, Adrian declared, staring directly into the cameras. And for those who have questioned her integrity, let me be clear. I am the lucky one. I am the one who had to earn her trust. I am the one who had to prove I was worthy of her time. He looked down at Elena, ignoring the chaos of the room, ignoring the shocked face of Vanessa Sterling, who looked as if she had swallowed a lemon. And regarding the anonymous source who sought to defame her, Adrian added, his voice turning to ice as he glanced at Vanessa, you will find your security clearance has been revoked. Security is waiting to escort you out. You are done here. Vanessa gasped, looking around as 2 large security guards stepped toward her. The humiliation was total, public, and swift, but Elena barely noticed. She was looking at Adrian. He had done it. He hadn't just defended her, he had exalted her. He had claimed her in front of the world, destroying the narrative of shame and replacing it with a narrative of power. You're crazy, she whispered, squeezing his hand. I told you, he whispered back, leaning in close, not caring that every camera captured the intimacy. I don't care about the noise. I only care about you. He turned back to the microphone. That is all. He led her off the stage, hand in hand, walking through the parting sea of stunned employees. They walked past the cameras, past the gossip, and into the elevator. As the doors closed, shutting out the world, the silence returned. But this time, it wasn't the silence of secrets. It was the silence of victory. So, Adrian said, loosening his tie as the elevator ascended toward the penthouse. Now that everyone knows we're partners, I suppose I should make it official. Elena looked at him, her heart soaring. Official? You just told CNN we're together. Not that kind of official. He smiled, reaching into his pocket again. I have a question to ask you, and this time, I won't accept a resignation letter as an answer. The elevator dinged, opening to the roof garden, where the city lay spread out beneath them, no longer a place of struggle, but a kingdom they would rule together. The morning light that filtered into the room was not the harsh, gray glare of a basement window. It was soft and golden and filtered through sheer linen curtains that danced in a gentle breeze. Elena opened her eyes slowly. There was no screaming alarm clock, no metallic rattle of old pipes, no dread sitting heavy on her chest about unpaid bills or eviction notices. There was only the sound of the city far below, a distant hum that felt like a lullaby, and the rhythmic breathing of the man sleeping beside her. She lay still for a moment, savoring the peace. It had been 6 months since the press conference, 6 months since the world had learned her name, and 6 months since she had left her old life behind. Her mother was in Zurich, responding beautifully to the treatment, video calling every Sunday with color in her cheeks and a smile that Elena hadn't seen in years. The debts were gone, not just paid, but erased from her memory, replaced by a sense of security that still felt like a dream. Elena shifted, the high thread count sheets feeling like silk against her skin. She looked around the room. It was Adrian's penthouse, but it had changed. Her books were stacked on the nightstand. Her favorite throw blanket was draped over the armchair. Her presence was woven into the fabric of his life, just as he was woven into hers. She thought back to that first morning at the Ritz-Carlton, when she had woken up in a panic, terrified of being discovered, terrified of being poor. She remembered the girl she was then, strong, yes, but so incredibly tired. She had spent her whole life fighting, holding up the sky for everyone else. She had saved herself 1,000 times over, surviving through grit and sheer will. But survival wasn't living. She looked at Adrian. He was still asleep, one arm thrown over his head, looking younger and softer than the titan of industry the world saw. He hadn't saved her from her incompetence. She was never incompetent. He hadn't saved her from her weakness. She was never weak. He had saved her from the loneliness of the fight. He had given her a place to rest her armor. She slipped out of bed, grabbing his discarded dress shirt from the chair and wrapping it around herself. She walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the skyline. It was the same city she had looked at from the bus stop, but now, it didn't look like a fortress she couldn't breach. It looked like home. She heard the soft pad of footsteps behind her, then felt warm, strong arms wrap around her waist. Adrian rested his chin on her shoulder, pressing a kiss to the curve of her neck. "You're up early," he murmured, his voice thick with sleep. "I didn't want to miss the view," she whispered, leaning back into him. "I prefer the view from the bed," he teased, tightening his hold. He pulled away for a moment, and she heard the familiar sounds of the espresso machine in the kitchenette, the hiss of steam, the clink of ceramic. A minute later he returned. He held out a mug. Elena took it, inhaling the aroma. It wasn't just coffee. It was black, with 2 sugars and a dash of cinnamon. She looked up at him, her eyes shining. It was a simple gesture, but it held the weight of their entire story. It was the clue he had given her in the office when she was terrified. It was the memory of the first night when they were strangers. And now, it was the ritual of their morning. "Just how you like it," he said softly, echoing the words from months ago. "Perfect," she replied, taking a sip. The warmth spread through her chest, chasing away the last lingering shadows of the past. She wasn't the secretary who spoke in silence anymore. She wasn't the girl running from the hotel room. She was Elena. She was loved. She was safe. And for the first time in her life, she didn't have to keep a single secret. "Come back to bed," Adrian whispered, taking the mug from her hand and setting it on the table. "The world can wait. Let it wait," Elena agreed. She let him lead her back to the warmth of the sheets, leaving the coffee steaming in the sunlight, a small, sweet testament to a promise kept. If this story touched your heart, if it made you believe that true love sees you even when you try to hide, share it with someone who needs to be reminded of their worth tonight. Like this video so we can keep bringing you these moments. And subscribe if you want more stories that feel like a warm embrace.